Welcome back to the Animal Combo Project, and this is the final tutorial of this series. I'm basically going to wrap everything up. So I wanted to share, when I was looking at the type here of Alan Lightman's Einstein's Dreams, I rediscovered, I wanted to change the by James Kleckner to no longer italics and all caps, and just have a nice serif, a little bit of shadows if I zoom in here. It's very simple, but it works, I think, better, and it's of course centered. So yeah, so that was a little change in between. So let's go ahead and wrap things up. So the first thing we're going to do here is we have this animal all as one image as a smart object, and since it's a smart object, we can apply smart filters. So I'm going to go to filter here and go down to blur, and we're going to choose the motion blur. Motion blur is really nice. When you apply as a filter, you can actually, basically bring back focus. So I can have some parts of the animal as if it's like an action. So I'm going to have it an angle like this with 41 pixels and click OK. And then what will happen is it'll create a little mask here underneath. And by the way, I can always double click on the motion blur and adjust this. So that's the other thing that's great. It makes it parametric rather than a static adjustment. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the mask here and choose a brush. And I have 30% here selected, and it is this soft brush. And so I'm just going to increase the size quite a bit. And basically, I'm going to paint to bring back focus in most of the areas. I mean, there's certain areas I want to have out of focus. Like I'm thinking the back part here of the wing, as if it's slightly moving, would be kind of cool to have it slightly out of focus, but only slightly. So it's going to be a very subtle effect if I zoom in here. Let's see here. Let's go in here, and you can, by the way, you can hit the X key if you want to bring back some blur. So maybe on this fin here, or in between here, the edges of the fur here, I can soften this a little bit. And then maybe this part of the paw, but then this part bring back some focus. So it looks like, basically it's pretty much in, sort of action here. So this is the really cool thing, is you can constantly kind of play around with this and be like, well, how much blur do I need to have here? And yeah, basically just kind of click around. Maybe these legs here have a little bit of blur, not a whole lot, but a tiny bit here, as if they were just in motion. The ear I think is fine, but maybe one ear is more in focus. So that one over here is a little bit more blurry. And it's a very subtle effect, but you can see here we're getting some nice action between the blur effect. The other thing you can do is you can go to the blend mode. When you double click on the motion blur, you can adjust the opacity, so how much of that blur is taking effect, and you can try and mess with the blend modes and see if something will work. Blur, certain things will happen. The main thing I want to adjust here is maybe the opacity of this. Now if I bring this to 0, it's going to bring it back to completely opaque. But I just want to back off a little bit, maybe to 80% or so, and click OK. Because what I'm looking for is subtlety, and that looks pretty good. Now I did, in between tutorials, add a little more blur to the shadow here. Now the next thing I want to do probably is add grain to the whole thing, minus the text. So what I'm going to do is click on this very top layer here, and we'll just add a new layer above it, and then we'll do an edit fill, and a little window popped up my other display here. We want 50% gray, and click OK. And then I'm going to change this blend mode from normal to overlay, and then go to filter, noise, and add noise. And then what we want is uniform, monochromatic checked, and then the percentage you can adjust however much you want. I think around 7% usually works pretty well for me. And now we got a more unified sort of surface. If we zoom in here, things look a little bit more unified. Now if you want to even add more distance, you could have the background be blurred out a little bit. So I could actually convert this whole image to a smart object, apply a filter blur choose a Gaussian blur, for example, and crank it up quite a bit until it starts to get real fuzzy for the whole background. Click OK, and then use the gradient tool and literally paint in by holding on shift more focus towards the bottom or the distance in the background, which actually is the way it is now, so I have to reverse these. There we go. And so now if we zoom in, we get a little bit more fuzziness back here, and then super sharper up here in terms of the clarity. And that tends to work pretty well overall. Again, because this is a smart filter now, I can double click on it and reduce the intensity of that overall blur. So make it as subtle as possible, mirror out 75%, and click OK. And that looks pretty good. So I'm definitely digging this. This will be the last tutorial. The one thing we could mess with, I don't think it's really necessary, but we could have some sand, some dust, floating in here. But it's just, I think it looks pretty well right now. But yeah, if you want to do that, what you could do is add a new layer and essentially create a cloud effect. I will actually show you how to do that just in case you want to try this out. So add a new layer, and what you want to do is select two colors that are in here. So I'm going to switch to my brush tool and just hold Alt or Option and select some sand, and then hit the arrow key and select maybe some darker sand here, and then go Filter, Render, and then choose Clouds, and it will create essentially the smoky cloud layer. And it didn't go over everything because I didn't realize where I was at on here, so I can drag this up further so it's above everything. And then what I want to do is blur it a little bit. So go Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, crank it up a little bit so it's softer, and then click OK. And then I can hide this whole thing by holding down Alt or Option and clicking on this mask at the same time. And so what that does, it creates a black mask. Now with my soft brush selected with paintbrush at a low opacity, I can reverse these and have white as my foreground color, increase size of my brush, and basically wherever I paint with white, I can apply just a little bit of dust, a little bit of arid sort of quality here to come across. And sometimes this works out pretty nice. Other times it can be a little bit overdone, like back here I think it's a little overdone. But now what I can do is reduce the opacity of that layer, and it's very subtle. It's just a little fine-tuned sort of effect. But a little bit of atmosphere does do a lot for your image, and yeah, I think I will actually keep that. I think it works pretty well. So that concludes this tutorial in the Animal Combo project. I hope you've enjoyed this series. Until next time, see you soon. Cheers.